Well, hello everyone. This is Andrew Vaiciunas, and I'll be presenting you debugging your web application. I've been with LANSA now for some good number of years. I joined in 1989 and took a 10-year break a few years back, and thought, you know what, this is really the right place to be back with the LANSA crowd. So I'm back and I'm presenting to you, again, debugging your LANSA web application. What we're going to talk about today is what happens when you get that error and you're running a LANSA application, right? A LANSA web application, because there's a number of different types of applications that you can create: Windows applications, character mode applications, batch type applications, and web browser applications. But how does that work? How do you debug a web application where the error is occurring? You don't know, is it happening on the client side within the browser, or is that error happening up on the server? And if it's happening up on the server, how do I see that, right? How do I look at that? And how do I track what's going on there? So there's a number of things that we can do with that, and to look at why we're having those errors. One is using the Visual LANSA Rdml Bugger. So Rdml being the LANSA, the LANSA language. We have our own IDE and our own debugger built right into that. So you're debugging at the LANSA level, the Rdml level here, right? So you're not debugging at some JavaScript or C# or C application or anything like that. You're debugging at the Rdml level, right? And we'll go through and have a look at how that works and some tips on how to use that. There's also, on the browser side, there's a few things that you can look at to understand what's happening also. So we'll take a peek at how you can use the browser tools to do some debugging. And then there's also LANSA log files. So as you're running your application, if something goes wrong, there is some logging going on within LANSA. So where do we find that, and what gets logged in there, and how can that help us also? Now, on top of the automated LANSA log files, there's also things that you can do within the Rdml to log things, to make sort of your programmer logs also. So we'll look at a couple of ways that we can do that. One in the browser and then one on the server side also. So we'll take a peek at that. And then there's just a little bit about, what do you need to, how is that debug environment within LANSA set up so that it can communicate with the server to see where you're at in the Rdml on the server, even though here you are on a client side, working within the LANSA development environment. How can you see what's up on the server? So there's a little bit of setup for that. And we'll take a peek at where that's done, just so you're aware of that. And then there's also stuff that's actually running in your Windows environment or on your server environment that supports that debugging effort. So we'll just take a quick peek at that also to see what's in there. The last thing, and not least, right? So last but not least is, what are some of the other things we can do if I run out of ideas on how to debug this particular application that I have? There are websites and communities and our support group that can help you through some of those errors that you might be having, or maybe they're just some how-tos and you don't realize that you're doing something wrong. So your peers in other companies and within our company can help you with understanding, how to correct that situation. So just before we move on, what I'd like to do is like to just get an idea of who, what's the makeup of the people that we have in this crowd today, right? So I've got the first question being, what's your familiarity with LANSA? Have you ever used it before? Maybe you've never used it before, maybe, right? I might be a LANSA developer, but have never developed web applications, remembering that I did say that we can develop web applications, Windows applications, flat screen applications. So all types of applications that we can create. What kind are we? All right. And then there might be a LANSA web developer, and they've just maybe wanted to look at some more hints on how they might be able to use the LANSA debug tool, or maybe they never needed to use the LANSA debug tool in the web environment, and now they're kind of going, in case I do run into a problem, how do I get past that? So, but right now it looks like I'm looking at some of these results here, and it looks like I can see, well, let's see, most of us here today are LANSA developers. Others, of those, some of them have no web experience. And there are people here today that have never used LANSA before. So welcome to, to those people who've never used LANSA. Hopefully this, although anytime that you see there could possibly be a bug in a LANSA application, that might not be the best way to learn LANSA, or to see LANSA, but welcome anyway, and just realize that given that there is a LANSA debug tool, we are working at a higher level in that low code environment. We're working at that low code environment for this debugger. Okay, so, and didn't want to do that. Okay, so so let's get out of that and go on to maybe the second question, which is, why did you come to this session today? Was it because you wanted to learn about what you might run into in a web programming environment? Or maybe you've already run into something and you're trying to figure out how do I check to see what's wrong and correct those things. So those are two options. Why you just want to learn about this stuff just because how would I if I ever did run into something, or I have run into something and I'd like to get a better understanding of how to move beyond an error in a web environment. So, so with this, I can't change the whole presentation, but with these results, I can at least maybe just get an idea at at what level I should be talking to, or whether I should just assume that there's people know about web applications, or maybe there's some specific things that I should be concentrating on. So. Looks like most people here are saying that, I just want to see what happens, if I do run into a problem. So that's a good place to be. All right, let's move along then. So the first thing, as I said, is the Rdml Debugger. As soon as my screen wakes up. There we go, is the Rdml Debugger. And I think the best way for me to go through is I just go straight to the editor now, and we'll go through an example of an application that is working, right? And just to see some of the IDE facilities for that. So I've written a little program here. And what it does, it just shows me a list of states and gives me some populations. They might be countries or provinces in some other country in Europe or Canada or something. And then as I click on any of these, it'll show me the cities, the major cities within those states and population for those, right? So apologies to everyone outside the United States. Me personally, I'm a Canadian. So, but I've been to pressure sometimes and write applications for other countries too. So, so if I were just to run this application now, I'm just going to run it, not debug it, but I'm just going to run this now, just to get an idea of what this application does. So the first thing it does, it goes off to this to the server, grabs a list of all the states. So there would be 1, 2, 3, some 50 states here. And then if I click on any of them, for example, Alaska, I see, there's one large city in Alaska. Alabama has some 5 larger cities, Arkansas 1, Arizona's got, oh, a good number there. What is it, 10 larger cities in there. So, so that's all this program does, right? It just brings up 2 lists like this, and I can click on the list on the left here. All right. Again, this particular application has a client side to the application, which is the browser portion, which is what we're looking at here. And then the data comes from the server portion, so that we call a server routine, retrieve data from a database on the server, and then return that data, and then display that in some helpful way in a browser environment. Right. So now, if I wanted to run this in a debug mode to see what's happening and when it's happening and where it's happening, the way I would do that is you saw me here say from the development environment, say I wanted to execute this. Well, this time I want to debug this application, right? So I just hit the debug instead. So what that's going to do, it's going to take me through the application one line at a time, and let me see what's happening, right? So here it says, first thing off, right off the bat, it says, you know, for within this particular program, debug main 2, which was the first program, because there's 2 of them, right? The server, client side, server side. This is the client side, and it's sitting here now at statement 37. And the next line, if I were to hit an F8, which would be, now this is going to show up every once in a while, right? Because I'm taking a little while deciding what I want to do in the debugger, and the browser itself, nothing to do with LANSA, but the browser itself is saying that something's taking very long. Do you want to wait for it to continue, or do you want to cancel this? I just said I'm going to wait, so I'm just going to keep waiting here, right? People are slower than computers for most of the time. So now, what I have an option of doing is either just continue execution and just say as though I wasn't in debug mode. There's a shortcut for that. See, it also says I could press the F5 key. I can step into or step over the highlighted line. So stepping into just means that if it's a call to some other routine, then it's going to move to that other routine and show me what it's doing in that routine. A step over just says, fine, just you know, run that statement, do whatever it's under that statement, but don't go there. Just show me, show me when you've come to the next line, right? And then there's also a step out of, which is if you were inside that called routine and you wanted to just leave that and continue execution that way. But the one that we would mostly use would be run to cursor or the step into. So run to cursor just says that if I were to put my cursor here on the end routine, for example, right, and then hit run to cursor, it will just run straight to that. It'll just run through everything in this routine. It'll just skip over those lines and stop at the end routine. Not skip the execution of those lines, but just skip showing me the, what's happening in those lines, right? So we're going to step into all of this, right? So, so now, I can hit this button or hit the F8 button, as we see, as in the tooltip, it says F8. So I'm going to start hitting the F8 button, right? So now it says, okay, it's going to do the load states routine. So if I were to hit the F8 button now, it takes me straight down to the load states, which is in the same program, but it's just a method within the same program. So I'm just going to keep hitting F8 here. All right, F8, it clears the list of states. And then it says, all right, get state is a routine in our server function, in our server program that was defined here, right? So, and we're going to execute this server function asynchronously. That means we're going to launch it and then continue on in this program while the other one runs independently, right? And then at some point it'll return a list of states into a list called list states, right? So let's do F8. So what's going to happen is it calls that other function, right? So now here it's saying, okay, I executed asynchronously, so hit the end routine, so I can just hit F8 here. We're done here, but what we're going to get is in that other routine, right? So if I look at this other routine, the debug data server, right? We see that it's called, and it's this find all states routine that we were running. So this is a source that I have on the client here, right, in my IDE, but it's telling me that on the server, this is where I am now. I'm at line 20 on the server, just about to run the find all states. So I can hit the F8 key here, right, also, and I would run around in this thing, 51 times, right? So now this is a great time to show what are some of the other features within the debug. Now, as you know, it might have noticed, on the left-hand side here, we see a list of all the variables that are being used within this function that we're sitting in, right? And we'll see that, oh yeah, the first one in this select, the first record that was selected was for Alaska, and here's the population for Alaska, etc. And so I can hit F8, and it says, okay, now we're going to add an entry to the states list, right? So that's great, okay, and it adds an entry to the states list. Notice list count now is 1, right? And I can just keep going around here 50 times, all right? Now we're at list count 2. I've got a couple of options here. I can now just say, you know what, I just want to run, as we noticed before in the debug thing, I can just run to cursor. I put the cursor down here and I say, now run to cursor. One of the other options I have is to say that I want to animate this, right? So on the server side, I've got the option to animate these, all right? So I can see it running around inside the code. Now this is a simple one because it will just go around in circles here, right? Something else I can do on the server side is say I want to change maybe, a value of something. I just double click this Arkansas, right? And I can say, I can make that my last name, right? So look at that. There's my last name now, right? And I just changed that to my last name so that when it does the add entry, right, it's going to add an entry with Vaiciunas in it instead of Arkansas, right? So that gives us the ability on the server side to, to adjust. If we kind of know that, hey, if this value shows up, then we run into a problem, and why is there a problem there, right? So it's a way, without having to change the code, compile the code, and then rerun it from scratch, to actually modify some of the information that's out there. Okay, so let's now animate this, right? I can just say animate all, right? And we can see, there it goes, it's going around in circles, round in circles. I can change how fast it does that. If you notice, there's a delay in there. I've got it at half a second. So it's running every half second, it's moving on to the next line, right? We're now at list count 10. And what I'm gonna do now is just say, no, you know what? I'm just gonna put my cursor down here and say, run to cursor, right? So it just, what it does is it stops this animation, right? And then that way I can go straight down and do something else. In other words, if I was going to do an animation of 5,000 records from some table or something like that, at some point in time I'm going to go, okay, this is working properly. How do I get out of that? Well, that's how you get out of it. You just say, stop the animation and then run to place your cursor somewhere and run to that. Okay, I'm going to hit the F8 key again. We hit the end routine. So what that means is that we're done now. So it's sent back. It's sent back the control back to the calling program. Right. So if we went back to home here, I can say, let's go back to main 2. It's not running anything either. Right. There's no yellow here. There's nothing in the call stack, which means it's done. Right. So if I go now here, I see, look at that, it's done. Right. Next step. So I say, hey, you know what? I want to hit Arizona. Right. What happens now if, at Arizona? Now, so I clicked Arizona, and now you can see, control has gone back to the IDE. It's flashing down here at the bottom. I'll click on that, and I see, that's what I did. I hit an item in the states list, and it says item got selection. So what's it going to do? It's going to go and graph the cities based on the state code that I clicked on. right? So now I can go in there and continue the processing there, right? If at any time I kind of go, you know what? Now I know that this piece is working or something like that. I just want to move on. Just going to finish off, right? So I can just say continue execution. That's the same as hitting the F5, right? And I'll just hit the F5 again here on the server side. So it'll come back, and we see now here that those are all the cities in Arizona, right? So on the URL, so just a couple of differences here. On the URL, we'll notice that it says debug, yes, right? And the name of the machine that I'm running on, the name of the PC that I'm running on here, and a port number here, right? So that's actually a port number. I'm telling you now that's a port number. And that's how the this session here knows which PC to show this the editor in, to show the code in, and which port number to the server I would be communicating with during this debug session. So if we compared that to say this one here where I wasn't doing a debug, notice there's nothing up here, right, up at the top in the URL showing us any debug information. Okay, so that's great. If everything's going fine, this is how how you're going to see everything, right? Let's take a peek now. What happens, right, if we do run into an issue? What are some of the things that we can do? So let me move back here, right? So let's have a look at that. Tools for debugging. We also have the LANSA log files, right? So there's actually facilities within LANSA that let you see some of the messaging from the web server or from the application runtime to tell us what's going on, what may have gone wrong or something like that. So how do we work with that then, right? And just wanted to check. All right. So in this case here, I'm going to open up a different program, one that has a little bit of a problem with it, right? So I'll go back to favorites here, and I'll see here's a page with an error. All right, so let me open that up, and I'll just go ahead and run it. It's the similar functionality, if not almost identical functionality, right? So let's execute this one now, right? So I execute this, and I say, all right, well, so far it's working great. Let's see, Alaska, there we go, Alabama. Oh, cool. Yeah. Arkansas. Yep, one there. Arizona, 1, 2, 3, 10 there. California. And I see California here. Uh-oh, what happened here? We got an error, right? So let's see what this message says. It says, error executing, debug data 1, find states, cities, unrecoverable error executing that. All right, so let's find out what this is. Now, first of all, this name here, debug data _1, it is a short name for one of our, for some program within our LANSA environment. So let's have a look at that. Out of all of these, if I move over, I've got a column that I selected up here that I always have available for me. So when I right mouse click on the column heading here, I can choose all kinds of information that I want to see. But one of them I selected C was identifier, right? So off on the right hand side, if I were to scroll over, I can see an identifier, right? And there we go. There's our debug data 1. That's the one that we saw in the message. So what is that? That one is debug data server E, right? So that's where the problem exists, or at least that's the routine that's complaining about this problem, right? So that's just off the web page. What else do we have? Okay, so up here, up on the title line, if I pull this little arrow down here, I can customize our little menu up there. And one of the ones I've got in there is an error log, right? So I'm just going to close that up. I've already selected it in there, so it's sitting there. I can click on that to see the runtime errors. So this one is the X_error log. right? And it tells me that, let's see, today, yep, October 14th, at 1:23 local time. Sorry guys, it's only afternoon for me. I realize it's evening for you guys, and thanks for sticking around to watch this. But here it says, all right, so that first message, or the last message really, just says that, yeah, it failed, return code 1, etc. Okay, great, let's go to another one. Yeah, error code 1, check that log, yep, okay, here, let's look at that other message here, and I see, oh, here's one, this is interesting, right? Attempt to insert list entry less than 1 or greater than maximum allowed entries. Let's have a look at the code for that, all right? So let's go into, so let me close this, right? And actually, let me go back here just for a second, all right? And in that line also, it said it was at statement 43, right? Within this program here, all right? So let's open up that program. So I'm just double clicking that to open that up. Statement 43 says, add an entry to the list, debug cities list. Why would that cause me a problem, right? So I'm just right mouse clicking here and saying I want to go to the definition of that list, or I could find it visually, you know, just manually. But go to the definition, there it is. It says, okay, and it says, look at that, define list, cities list, and it says here entries 10, and of course, California's got more than 10 large cities in it. So it ran in, it tried to add an 11th entry, and that's when it failed. So let's go ahead and let's change that to something like 999 or something like that, right? So I'm gonna compile that, right? And let's take a peek at this again when it's done. So in progress, it's still compiling, completed, great. Okay, so let's go back to this. I'm gonna refresh this and run this again, right? So I'm just doing the refresh in the browser, right? So there's Alaska, Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, so far so good. California, look at that. See, that's why it only got down to about here and then it failed. So there we go. That's what our problem was in this particular case, and we fixed that. Great. Okay, now, I'm just going to see if there's any questions. I've got a question out there. Quick question on the error log model. How long do the logs persist? They will exist forever. All right. So sorry, this is a question from the audience here. They will exist forever. So I'm just going to bring that up, right? And so this log, if you notice, I've got some from last week, even from Friday. What I can do is I can say, I want to discard all the records from the log, right? So now they're gone. So that's how long they last. They last as long as I don't kill them, right? So some of the other options I have also is to, is to refresh that. If I've got this open and I'm just watching what's happening in the background somewhere, and then the ability to open this up somewhere else. Okay, so so hopefully I've answered that one. So now, moving back to here, the other approach is, if it's a more complicated error, it's more of a logic error maybe, and not so much of a typo in my code, or a syntactical error or a bounds error like we just had here. Maybe it's more of a more of, like I said, a logic error. So I might want to push information out where I can see it and track it as the application is running in a more complex environment, and then I can gather all that information and study it maybe in a Excel spreadsheet or somewhere else. So there's a couple of places that I can do this on the and I'll show you two methods that we can use to do that, right? Okay, so so for this one, I've got another application here that I've created, right? This one doesn't have any errors in it, but what it does have is some logging in there, right? So a couple of different types of logging that I've got in here, and this one is in the browser environment, right? So if I were to look at this, right, and I look down the code here, I will see in a couple places here where it says sysweb console log, and then I can put some text mixed in with a variable, so I can actually put out information about what's going on and what some of the values are within the function, within that program at the time that it runs into this, right? So you do need, in this case, you do need to add in some code and compile it and then run the application. Now we could put little if blocks around that to say, hey, if I'm running this application with this, I don't know, some sort of a flag turned on or something like that in some database or settings file or something like that, I then make up, I could leave this code in here and just have it execute if I've got this flag turned on or something like that, right? But in this case, it's just going to do it. We're going to run into this. Sysweb is basically a facility that LANSA has for a whole bunch of system functionality, and one of those is the console. So what that's going to do is it's going to push information out to the browser console, right? And down here in this line, whenever it hits this, it's going to say this routine returned, and we returned some number of records, right? So this is a variable that's inside here, and we're going to return some number of records. And the same thing down here, I've got some more here saying that we're calling this routine, and then we return and we've successfully completed that routine, right? So let's run this and see what happens here, all right? So I'm going to run this now, execute that. And so as I said before, we've got, as I showed before, there's one that says here, I'm going to read the states table and then provide some information about what I read and when I read it and things like that. How do I see that stuff for the console? Well, within the browser, at least this browser and Chrome, so this is Edge, I'm using Edge, and we could also do this in Chrome. They both have, at least, well, first of all, in Chrome, they've got more tools, developer tools, right? You can also hit the F12 key, so to get the developer tools also, or like I said, hit the ellipsis button, more tools, developer tools, and we end up we see the same application running, right? But it also shows us a whole bunch of other stuff like, oh, what's the HTML or CSS behind it and everything. But there's also this console down at the bottom here also. So when we look at the console information, we see here's that message that we had sent, calling this find all states routine. And then the find all states routine returned 51 records. By the way, that's for those who know something about United States or care. It's 50 states plus 1 district of Columbia, right? So that's why we have 51, I believe. So so now if I click one of these, right, like California, right, to bring up that list here, I see, it says, oh, I called the find state cities with a code called CA, and then it completed. So it presented all of these and then completed. So, and as I click on any of these other ones, it gives me these console messages also, right? So, so something else that we can do here also is to see in debugging what happens when I use a different format for the web page also. For this one, within Edge, using the developer utilities here, I can change the kind of device that I'm running on. So here's an iPhone SE, an iPad Pro, etc. So I can sort of see what happens there too. I can turn it sideways and see, you know, what the effect is on that also, and whether there's any error messages that might show up as a result of that too, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's available within the developer utilities here. All right. So so that's using the sysweb console .log command. And now I've got a couple questions. as long as I have memory on the server, or what are the limitations and how verbose can they be? I'm guessing this question has to do with this log. There's not, if it is regarding this log, then there's no limits that I'm aware of as to what you can put out, right? As long as it's available to you at the time that you're writing, as you are writing the console log lines, right? So here I just did two simple ones here, but I can put in date and time and a whole string. I can create a string of whatever I want to show, all right? Okay, so that's the syslog. What about on the server side? We don't have a browser on the server side to view logs like this. So how would I put out similar type logging on the server side? Well, as we see here, there is this log, this server component. So let me just zoom over to that server component, right? And show how we can do logging there, right? And I've done the same type of thing here also. But we don't have a syslog there. So what I've done is I just took an example straight out of our documentation and just adjusted a little bit to output stuff straight to a text file. I found that is quite useful, and in much the same way as we can put information out into this log, the x_error log, we can also put information out into, well, whatever text file you like, or whatever physical, the actual table file you like, however you want. In this case, I output it there. So I have a little routine here that I've just copied and pasted down at the bottom here. There it is, Rdml for logging into a text file, right? So it's just this routine here, and what that does is it accepts here, so sample print simple log. There we go. So what it does is it receives log text, whatever it is you want to stick in there, right? And then also, so it does three things. It opens up the log file, whatever I've called it. It writes the text into that log file and then closes that log file, right? There's more efficient ways to do this, but for right now, for this example, this was very efficient for this example and quick. And then all these do is it just calls this method and does whatever, does these three things, either the open, the write, or the close. So we have run this now already, all right, because we just finished running it, with that example here, with this one here, right? And let me just close this routine here. Right? So if I look at Iowa and Hawaii and Georgia, so let's look at the log file on the server side, right? So what I've done is I've created a link here that goes to my log file. I call that ZZZ log file, right? .text. So it's pointed to my server side, and here it is. It just says and the last record here that was written was using this program, Debug Data 2. There's the date and time. And here's the routine, and that routine was called with GA for Georgia and returned 5 records. Right. So that's an example. So as I do more work here, so for example, if I were to go back to this and just refresh this, so it's just loading up the state populations. If I go back into this log file again, so this log file, I see, look at that, find all states was called, and it returned 51 records. Right? So the same, I'm just logging the same kind of information, but so that we can see though that there's a way to do it on the server side and a way to do it on the client side also, right? So that's a little bit about logging, right? I didn't want to get too in depth with that, but there we go. All right. Let's flip back to our presentation here, and so logging events within Rdml, the debug step. So we noticed before that when we're debugging, right, that there is I mentioned the device name, which in this case was, there it is, Andrew Surface, right, and a port number. right? And again, the device name is there. Well, the port number is there so that when there's applications running on the server, when I'm running a web application and it calls a server routine of some sort or server functionality, what port does that go over? It's not going to go over 80. So what port is that going to go over? So we've invented this, you know, and you can adjust that to whatever port number you want. But it's just important to know that it needs to be open through, in the firewall. That port that you're using in development, in your development environment, needs to be open to your server, whatever that server is, so that it can, so LANSA can communicate back and forth, sending the information about, oh, what line am I running on the server, and what are the values for all the fields that I've got on the server, etc. All that information that we see in the debugger, in the IDE, in Visual LANSA, all that information has to come from the server, and it comes from this, right, over this port, right? And also, how do we know, you know, what machine we're using? Because there might be 3 or 4 different programmers doing debugging all at the same time. Oh, heck, maybe there's 15 or 16 programmers doing debugging at the same time. So how does it know which device has got to send information over this port number back to? And that's what this is. It's this ID right here. All right. So it's important to realize that if you run into trouble and it's not, your debug is not working against your server, it's probably because, more than likely, because and I'm wagging my finger here as I'm talking, but you can't see this, is more than likely because the firewall has restricted this port number, whatever port number that was. So you either need to change this port number, you know, the configuration to, you know, to be somewhere in a range of open ports, or change the firewall, have, you know, the network admin change the firewall to allow that port. All right, so that's on the debug setup. And where is that? Let's go back to the editor here, right? If we look at File, Options, right? In there we see there's a whole bunch of things that we can customize for within the IDE. Also in the source, one of the things I always do is put indentation lines, make sure it does get indented, and put the line numbers, right? I find I can't survive without those 3 options turned on. But also you'll notice down here, there's also the debug tab here, debug section, and that's where we see, you know, the computer name and the port number. All right. Now notice here it also says, oh, restart service, right? There is a service within in this environment. There is a service running in the Windows environment that manages that communication back to the server and from the IDE and from the server to the IDE, right? So so that's running all the time, and so if you find that it's not running, you have that ability to restart that service. What does that mean, right? So that's sort of our next you know, our next bit here is that when you look at you know, the programs that are actually running, the services and programs that are actually running in your Windows environment, where your IDE is running, you'll notice that you know, when you're not running an actual debug session, you'll have you know, you'll see these 2 services running. Right, so one is the Visual LANSA debug service, and that's the thing that allows us to communicate back and forth between the server and here in the debug mode, right? And then just something here that handles routing for your web application itself through the web server, right? So when you're running an application, when you're actually running an application in debug mode, you'll notice that there'll be another one of these guys probably running, right? You know, managing the communication of the actual web application, not your debug, but your web application. But also, you'll see this TP stub running also. So, so for each application that you're debugging here, this should show up, right? And what the restart service does in that other window I just showed you is restart this service right here. It's restart that service. In case it's shut down for whatever reason. Windows sometimes does stuff like that, right? Or maybe you shut it down for some reason because you were debugging something else in the Windows environment, or some other program killed this or something. So that's something to check for also. If your debug isn't working, make sure that this is running, right? And then when you're actually debugging, successfully debugging, you should see one of these show up too. All right, so that's what's running on your PC to support LANSA debug. On the server side, it's the whole LANSA runtime on the server side that's got all this stuff built into there. So, all right. So now we've gone through a number of things that we can go through in trying to find what's gone wrong with our application and how to see those. The last thing, and again, not the least thing, is all this other stuff, the LANSA communities and the support group that we have at LANSA, the excellent support group, and also some web information also. So if you go to developer.lansa.com, right? So that's where I'm going to go to. I'm going to go to developer.lansa.com. So I'm just going to pull up a browser here and say go to developer. There it is, right? Developer.lansa.com, right? So there it is. And once that comes up, which I guess somebody in my household is using a lot of internet. So on the resources tab, if you click on that, right, it'll take you to that screen we just saw over there, right? And so there's e-learning. There's a number of things here. E-learning, which is a great program for taking you through, courses that you can take, at your leisure to learn how to program in LANSA in all the different environments. There's also the documentation, of course. So we've got full documentation, extensive amount of documentation, more than you can ever read in, a year, right? So, so there's that. But there's also a LANSA blog. So if I just click on that, there is a LANSA blog that has some information, about some changes that have happened, maybe some things that people haven't thought about how to enhance your LANSA applications, etc. How to embed an about page into your LANSA applications, etc. There's also a search facility in here also, so you can search for, oh, there we go, debug, right? So let's see if there's anything in here for debug. I'm not sure. Yes, there would be. There we go. So what's new in EPC 141.070? So it gives you a little bit, some more information about that. If I go back now, back to developer.lansa.com, I'm just going to take that off. I'm just going to go back the quick way here. And I see one of the other things, and this is the one that I really, really like, is the LANSA forum, right? Now you do have to sign up for the LANSA forum, right? It takes a day or so for them to send back an initial password for you. But we don't want to just have like everybody in the world signing up for the for this to post all kinds of stuff. But here's where you can put in your questions, right? I'm on here. There I am. I'm on as Andrew. So here, let's see. Oh, there we go. One of the things I looked at was compiler. So if I call up, I want to see some activity about the compiler, right? So here's a bunch of stuff that came back about compiler, right? And I can click into here and see the comments, that people have made, and some, regarding that whatever that question was. And I see that, yeah, maybe this answers my question, and maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't, I can post a brand new string of questions, and wait for some answers to come back and start conversing that way. So this is one of my favorite ways to get information, right? So that's off of there also. And of course, LANSA support, right? So our support group, our support page, you can, if you run into a problem that you just can't seem to resolve, you can go to this page. From here, there's a whole bunch of things you can find. For example, release notes, or different types of resolved issues that we've had in the past that we thought were useful to show people, right? So for Visual LANSA, there might be a whole series of things here, right? So so this is well worth looking into also. So these are all things that people reported, and then we resolved. And most of them are on the older side, of course. LANSA doesn't fall over too often. So So that's, this is another area. And then of course, you can log a request with the LANSA support group itself if you can't find an answer anywhere else, and they will, you know, get back to you depending on the severity of the error. Whether it's let's say it's a production environment down, they'll get back to you within, I can't remember what it is, an hour or something like that, guaranteed within that. And then all the way down to a how-to question, you know, where you sort of at the bottom of the list, just because your business isn't going to fail because of a how-to question. So we prioritize that way also. So there we go. So there's developer resources. Like I said, a lot of great information in here also. All right. Here I just put in a little list of some of all of that, right? And you know, maybe you can take a screenshot, or in fact, I think you can get a copy of this presentation a little bit later, and you know, use all of these when you run into anything, or even just if you're learning, right? So at that, I will first of all thank you for your attention. You know, if you've got any more questions, I'm not sure if anyone else has any questions. Let's see, do I have any more sitting here? Again, thanks everyone for your attention. Sorry I've run over, especially given that it's, you know, getting on to what, 7 o'clock in parts of Europe. So thanks a lot for your attention, and you know, best of luck with all your LANSA programming and debugging. All right. Talk to you later all. Bye.